Good afternoon. Oh, none of you have been here before. Good afternoon. Oh, you did it. Yeah, that's how we do it. My name is Cleve Corner. I'm the manager of author and speaker engagement here at the Pratt. Thank you so much for coming out on this Saturday afternoon. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. Juliette's going to speak for 45 minutes. Then we'll have time for about 15 minutes for your questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand and Juliette will call on you. I'll let you know we have time for one or two more questions, and we'll stop promptly at 4 o'clock. And then Juliette will be happy to sign the book that you purchased from our friends at Greedy Reads who are out front. All right. One other piece of housekeeping. If you parked in the Franklin Street garage, let me know. I'll give you a sticker for validation of parking. We do validate all of our parking here for our author events. So in the future, if you have trouble getting down here, right on Franklin Street. And I usually print out my introductions, but I'm going millennial. This afternoon, I'm happy to welcome Juliette Wells back to the Pratt Library to discuss Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. Shy and penniless, Fanny Price is brought up on her uncle Sir Thomas Bertram's estate, Mansfield Park, as an act of charity. Sir Thomas also owns land and benefits from the labor of enslaved people in the Caribbean colony of Antigua. Fanny is miserable until her kind cousin, Edmund Bertram, takes her under his wing. Having secretly fallen in love with him, Fanny suffers severely when his head is turned by the captivating Mary Crawford. Fanny's quiet fortitude makes Mansfield Park one of Austen's most psychologically astute novels. Juliette Wells is a professor of literary studies at Goucher College, where she is active in outreach relating to the library's distinguished Jane Austen collection. She is the author of 3 histories of Austen's readers and fans, most recently a new Jane Austen, How Americans Brought Us, the World's Greatest Novelist, and we hosted Juliette for that last year. For Penguin Classics, she edited the 200th anniversary deluxe editions of Austen's Emma and Persuasion. She was a guest co-curator for the Morgan Library and Museum's 2025 exhibition, A Lovely Mind, Jane Austen at 250, or 250, which just closed last Sunday. It is my great pleasure to welcome back to the Pratt Library, Juliette Wells.
Thank you all very much. I thought I might want this as a prop, so I just borrowed it from the table. I wanted to share with you a little bit about the Morgan show in New York that closed, A Lively Mind. I mean, Jane Austen did also have a lovely mind, I'm sure, but it was a lively mind. A refresher, should you have been brought here by someone who knows all this, but you don't know all this. Jane Austen is indeed celebrating her 250th birthday this year, officially on December 16th. And as you can see from her date of death, she died at 41 and a half, which, as lifespans go, was not atypical for her era. It was neither long nor short. In the context of her family, it was quite short, though. Her parents both lived into their 60s, 70s, 80s. And most of her siblings also lived many decades longer than she did. So she had the shortest life of her immediate family. She began writing when she was a teenager. And we know this because she carefully hand-copied the stories and sketches and spoofs and parodies that she wrote when she was a teenager. She aspired to publication early on. She tried to get her novels published. Her father tried to help her. But she had to be very patient. She was in her 30s when she first held a published novel of hers in her hand, and as you can see, that was Sense and Sensibility. She was extraordinarily productive in the coming years. She did not know that she would become ill in 1816 and die in 1817, but I find myself saying if she had somehow known that, she could scarcely have been any more productive than she was. Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice were both revised versions of earlier novels that she had started writing in her late teens, early 20s. Mansfield Park was the first of her novels that did not have an earlier version. So she wrote Mansfield Park from scratch, and then Emma, likewise from scratch, and then Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. It does look like the formatting of this slide got a little wonky. So that should say Northanger Abbey and Persuasion. Those were both complete at the time of her death, and her surviving sister and one of her brothers worked on bringing them out 6 months after her death. And the portrait that you're seeing on this slide is the only authentic image of Jane Austen's face that was created in her lifetime, and no one would have imagined that it would be so important as a record of this now quite famous author. During her lifetime, she had modest renown. Her novels sold moderately well. She was proud of her earnings, but she didn't get rich from them, not at all. They were well reviewed, but really only one reviewer commented on the literary merit of her novels, as opposed to reviewers writing things like, "These are entertaining. These have characters you will recognize. Your teenage daughters may read these novels without fear for their morals." You know, is that kind of judgment rather than, oh my goodness, this person is doing something new with a novel and this really matters. She did see that in one review, but only the one. So the Morgan show that just closed, yeah, well, we are not happily formatted here because you can't see a lively mind at all. You have to take my word for it. If you have never been to the Morgan Library and Museum in New York City, do consider going there someday. It is a magnificent place to see art exhibitions and literary exhibitions. It is a place that welcomes all interested people to explore their collections. You can make an appointment in the reading room and request a Jane Austen manuscript, and you don't have to have a PhD or be on an academic faculty to have that access. But it had been 15 years since the Morgan last put on a curated exhibition on Jane Austen, and we were just amazed. I think I was the least amazed by how many people came, 119,005, which was record-breaking for the Morgan. So especially in the last couple of weekends when I was up there were crowds. I hope they were having a good experience, but it was something to see. The second anniversary that show was celebrating has to do with this woman, Alberta Hersheimer Burke, a native of La Crosse, Wisconsin, who came to Goucher College in 1928 when it was an all-women's college, as it remained until the late 1980s. And she majored in English at Goucher. She fell in love with Jane Austen, but not in the classroom. So she has written. And she went back to her home state of Wisconsin to earn a master's degree in literature. She married the brother of one of her classmates at Goucher, which I'm told by older Goucher alums is one of the things that you did. Like, how did you meet the men? You met the brothers of your classmates, among others. And they spent their adult lives living in Baltimore, collecting books, going to the theater and the ballet and the symphony and chamber music, and traveling up to New York for more of the same, and traveling to Europe for even more of the same. Here's a picture of the two of them looking dapper on one of their transatlantic journeys. They liked to go to England and the continent by ship, even when airplanes existed. They preferred it. And what's great about these two is that Henry Burke, whose nickname was Harry, was warmly supportive of his wife Alberta's aspirations to deepen her expertise in Jane Austen and build a Jane Austen collection. It's much more common in American history for us to talk about literary collectors who were men, like J.P. Morgan Sr. and J.P. Morgan Jr., founders of the Morgan Library, like Henry Folger, who was ably assisted in his collecting by his well-educated and knowledgeable wife, Emily Folger, the Folger Shakespeare Library in D.C., of course, a memorial to both of them. Harry Burke was born in Baltimore to Lithuanian-born parents, or I should be correct and say his parents were born in what is now Lithuania. So his parents were Eastern European Jewish emigres. Alberta was the granddaughter of a German Jewish emigre, so a different generation. And the two of them did not have children, which frees up time and money for collecting. And I say that looking at my child in the front row. Wouldn't have missed you. Harry co-founded the organization known as the Jane Austen Society of North America, JASNA, 4 years after his wife's death, and very much in the spirit of her love of Jane Austen and collecting. And JASNA has well over 6,000 members now. It has free membership available to students during this celebratory year. So any students in your life who are Jane Austen fans or might become Jane Austen fans, secure them a membership. And the organization holds an annual meeting in a different North American city every year. Baltimore is hosting this year in Harbor East in mid-October. So you can come down to the Marriott Harbor East in the October 10th to 12th and see a lot of Regency-dressed people around the harbor. It should be a lot of fun. Because Alberta, here's the reminder of that, Alberta died in May 1975. So she did not get to see the 200th birthday celebrations for Jane Austen in December 1975. However, Alberta had organized a two-part bequest of her wide-ranging Jane Austen collection. Alberta chose the Morgan Library to receive manuscripts, handwritten documents, and original artworks, and Goucher College, Alberta's alma mater, received everything else, which is an extraordinary collection in its own right, including multiple copies of first editions of all of Austen's novels, English and US and beyond, translations, adaptations, ephemera, scrapbooks of ephemera, all kinds of things. So Goucher has been very fortunate since 1975. Because Alberta was a benefactor to the Morgan with the group of manuscripts and artworks, the Morgan was ready to celebrate her as well as Jane Austen in this show, A Lively Mind. So this is what you would have seen if you visited the exhibition while it was up. You would have seen these two banners at the entryway. You would have walked through the doorway and seen a setup evoking Jane Austen's writing, a reproduction of a little 12-sided table. The original is the table on which she is said to have done her writing. And where she was living at the time is this place. It's now called Jane Austen's house. During her lifetime, it was called Chawton Cottage, Chawton being the village in Hampshire where it's located. And if you think of England, that southern coast on the English Channel, the county of Hampshire is pretty much right in the middle of that southern coast. Still quite rural, even today. But this is the site for Austen fans to make their literary pilgrimages. This is the place where she lived with her widowed mother, with her dear elder sister Cassandra, with their family friend Martha Lloyd. This is the place where it all happened. And I emphasize that because the city of Bath, where Jane Austen lived briefly and where she set some of her novels, Bath is doing that thing it does every year. Even now, it's hosting a giant Jane Austen festival that people come to from around the world, which is very nice for Bath. But Bath does not matter to Jane Austen's writings nearly as much as Chawton. Here to tell you, here to help. This building did not remain, or I should say, after Jane's lifetime, after her sister Cassandra's lifetime, this building was lived in by laborers on the estate. Determined Jane Austen pilgrims did show up, knock on the door, and say, "Show me where she wrote." You know, and these people living there were very nice about it. In 1949, a room of the house opened as a museum, and gradually the whole place became an author house museum. A few of the manuscripts that were on view in the Morgan show, A Lively Mind, included these two notes on the dates of Jane Austen's composition of her novels. And this is where we get into Mansfield Park, because Mansfield Park is mentioned on both of these. The screen makes them look, you know, they could be any size. I'm just showing you a picture. So the larger one of these, the one on the left that you're seeing the front of and the back of, about the size of the palm of my hand. It's not big. The one on the right, every time I looked at it in the gallery, it seemed to have gotten smaller. It's very, very, very small. It's just a little scrap. Definitely the note on the left is in Cassandra, Jane's elder sister's handwriting, because it's signed with her initials, CEA. And the one on the right, who knows? I would make the case that it's likely Jane's. We opened up that question in the exhibition. But these are sources that tell us, when did Jane Austen write Mansfield Park? According to these, she began it somewhere around February 1811 and finished soon after, is it June? June 1813. So there's overlap. Jane Austen was seeing Sense and Sensibility through the press. She was revising Pride and Prejudice. She was seeing that novel through the press. She was also writing Mansfield Park. So it is not accurate to think of Jane Austen as working on one novel, finishing it, closing it, getting a new idea, working on the next novel. And I think that's important to emphasize with Mansfield Park, because Mansfield Park feels like a complete shift in tone from the previous published novel, Pride and Prejudice. And people feel that today. People felt that very strongly in Jane Austen's own lifetime. And many of her friends and family, when she asked them what they thought of Mansfield Park, they said, liked Pride and Prejudice better. You know, Pride and Prejudice is the funniest, and Mansfield Park is the least funny by far. The introduction that you heard, Shy and Penniless Fanny Price, I wrote that. I was talking with my students at Goucher just the other day. When you find a description of a classic novel on the back of the book, now this edition doesn't have it there, but you open it up, you find that here. My students tend to treat those as if they were written by God. And I said, no, God doesn't write these. You know, who do you think writes things like this? And then the students thought, oh, I don't know. Somebody in the publishing office? And I said, yeah, probably. Or in this case, me. And I feel very strongly about not including plot spoilers. Like, if you have not read Mansfield Park yet, I don't want to give it away to you in my little 5-sentence summary. I initially had Shy and Impecunious Fanny Price, and I was told impecunious wasn't a common enough word and I should change it to penniless. It's fine on that. And you heard the big challenge for Mansfield Park, aside from it's not funny, is wealth comes from enslaved people. And Jane Austen does not address that in very much depth, but she makes it clear. She makes it clear early on. It's always there in the background. And that is a great concern for many present-day readers, especially young readers of color, not only them, but especially them. And I wanted to make sure that this new edition acknowledged that reality and acknowledged the complexity of reading such a novel, like, from the beginning. So that's why I made sure to mention Sir Thomas's land ownership and a source of his wealth right away. So some of you will know how Jane Austen was first identified on her initial title page with the phrase, by a lady. This was not unusual. A lot of authors during Jane Austen's lifetime chose not to put their names on their title pages. It wasn't that common yet to use pen names, pseudonyms. If you're thinking like, ooh, the Bronte sisters used pseudonyms, and so did George Eliot. That was less common. It was more common to just have no name at all, or have a really general phrase like, by a lady. And scholars have investigated and found that dozens of different authors, women authors, use the phrase by a lady. There's nothing unique about Jane Austen's use of it. We wish we knew a lot more about the choices that went into that for her, but like so many aspects of her life, there's no documented record of those decisions. So we don't know, was this 100% her idea? Did her brothers help out and say, women publishing on unmarried women publishing is still considered a little bit unconventional or a lot unconventional. Can you please not put your name on the title page? We just don't know. But if you bought or borrowed Sense and Sensibility in 1811, you would have known from that phrase that the author was a woman, and you would have known from that phrase that the author was of a social class to describe herself as a lady, cognate to a gentleman. Then, if you picked up Pride and Prejudice, her second published novel, all you got was that it was by the author of Sense and Sensibility. Oh, big help. So scholars have pointed out, well, what if you didn't have Sense and Sensibility around? You know, that really would not help you at all. You might not even have known the connection to the by a lady in this case. And this went on. So Mansfield Park, by the author of Sense and Sensibility and Pride and Prejudice. Yes. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, publishers. Even her final publication after her death still does not have her name on the title page. You can see it's still the author of the previous works. But this biographical notice of the author, which was a short essay in those volumes, written by Jane Austen's brother Henry, but not attributed, not signed by him, but it's definitely by him. And we have documentation proving that. Henry wrote it. And the biographical notice states the author of these works was my late sister, Jane Austen. You know, here are the facts of her life. And to be clear, the biographical notice begins with facts and then it moves very quickly into myth. There are very few actual facts and then a lot of protective myth making about this late sister, late family member. Myths such as everything came finished from her pen, which is not true because that's not how creative writing works. She revised really hard. Henry also said wonderful things like she never said an unkind word about anyone, which is given the lie by her surviving letters in which she said plenty of unkind things about plenty of people. So you get the sense that Henry was being protective. But a lot of the kind of palatable things that he said about his sister were taken as fact by people who didn't have any other way of knowing about her. And some of those myths about Jane Austen are still present even today. That she didn't write for fame. Well, no, she was very proud of her fame. She does seem to have been protective of her privacy, for sure, but she was proud of her earnings, she was proud of her fame. It's wrong to say otherwise. So those first edition copies that you've just seen pictures of are all from the Morgan's collection. Goucher also has beautiful first edition copies, thanks to Alberta Burke. One of the loans that we had in A Lively Mind was from the British Library. And this is not much to look at. It's a very faded sheet of manuscript, as you can see here. And it's headed, it's all in Jane Austen's handwriting, it's headed Opinions of Emma. And this and the somewhat less faded document Opinions of Mansfield Park. My wonderful Penguin editor, whom I'll show you a picture of in a moment, she said, oh my gosh, these are like Regency Goodreads. And they are. These are documents in which Jane Austen gathered responses to these two novels from friends and family, friends of friends, friends of family, and she attributed each one to the name of the person who said it. And so you get a sense, like, what did Jane Austen's mother like of what she wrote? What about her favorite niece, Fanny? What about her sister, Cassandra? What about this brother, that brother? Jane Austen had 6 brothers. They had views on what she had written. And these are really charming. Sometimes people, especially in the friends of friends category, said, didn't get through it. So perhaps we can relate. Liked this character, didn't like that character, you know, and everybody liked Pride and Prejudice more than Mansfield Park, as I said. The Morgan show, once we moved from Jane Austen's lifetime into her afterlives, her legacy, it drew on my 3 books about Austen's readers. And yeah, I'll just move on. I wanted to say, if you did not get up to New York, which is extremely understandable, it being New York and we being here, a fair amount relating to this show is still on the Morgan's website. There is an audio guide written and narrated by me about more information about 16 items in the show. There is a video with me and my co-curator, Dale Stinchcomb, speaking, and plenty of photographs from the show, so ways to get a sense of it. These 2 ladies, by the way, are in a 1790s fashion plate. They are showing off the fashionable color poppy red, which, if you were English, you either pronounced as coquelicot or coquelicot. It's a French word, and English people then and now tend to mangle French. So it might have been coquelicot. And Jane wrote in a letter to her sister that from exactly the same month as this fashion plate that she had heard that this color was going to be trendy in the winter of 1798, and she was planning to get a feather in that color and switch it out in her cap. So Jane Austen, known for her literary style, was also a fashionable person interested in knowing what was trendy and, within her limited means, keeping up with it. Okay, moving on from A Lively Mind. Elda. Elda is the vice president and publisher of Penguin Classics and has been for a remarkably long career in American publishing. She's also a poet. And her approach to the classics in Penguin's New York office has been to think as creatively as possible about how to connect classics with new readers, new generations of readers. And she and her team have used art and cover design in extremely clever ways and in order to create new packages for books that will appeal to readers. She and I first worked together back in 2008 when we were both much younger. We were both pregnant with our second kid at that time, as it happened. We were working on an enriched ebook. Ebooks were brand new, and Elda was thinking, how can Penguin Classics use what it already has and offer ebook readers something new? And so she came up with the concept of an enriched ebook that would have everything the regular Penguin Classics book had in it and more. And I was responsible for the and more. This no longer exists. These enriched ebooks, I think, went by the wayside as ebook technology advanced. But Elda got in touch again in 2014 as we were celebrating the 200th anniversary of publication of Austen's novels. And remember, Sense and Sensibility, 1811. So 2011, we started birthday cakes for the novels. Emma was set to celebrate its 200th anniversary of publication in 2015. And so that was the first of these deluxe, so-called deluxe editions. And from the beginning, they were paperbacks, but they were paperbacks with better quality paper, acid-free paper, with these fun covers. The technical term for these, Elda taught me, and we both laugh. These are called French flaps. Why? I have no idea. And Penguin commissioned a Brooklyn artist named Dadu Shin to create the covers for the original ones and also these ones that came out last week. And the Emma cover I loved from the beginning. The sense that this woman silhouetted on the cover who's looking away from you, who's full of other people, that to me suggested Jane Austen's imagination. It suggested the imagination of Emma Woodhouse, who is a famously imaginative, almost too imaginative heroine. And then you see all these individuals and couples dancing around the rest of the cover. This is years before Bridgerton. And Dadu Shin, who is a Korean-American artist, used so many different skin tones for the characters as a way of suggesting that everyone can imagine themselves into Austen's world. I loved that in 2015. I still love it. And my absolute favorite is the woman in the middle of the Emma silhouette whose skin is turquoise. I love her. I think she must be Jane Fairfax. If you know Emma, Jane Fairfax is the most mysterious character, and I think perhaps she is the turquoise lady. So this has been an immensely successful edition for Penguin. It's still on bookshelves. It got a boost in 2020 from the Emma film by Anya Taylor-Joy Anya Taylor-Joy played Emma. It's directed by Autumn de Wilde, and the poster for the film has Anya Taylor-Joy wearing clothing that's almost exactly the same yellowish color, which is a nice tie-in. But what I want to talk about is not how pretty these books are, but what makes them different on the inside. Because this was the first of all of the new Penguin Deluxe editions, I got to suggest to Elda what I thought would be helpful to readers, what would be different from editions of Austen that were already out there. And I was taking in information from my students, in the classroom when we were using regular Penguin Classics, and I would say, oh, look, there's a number that tells you there's an end note. Let's flip to the end note and see what the editor has to say to us. And we would all dutifully flip to the end note, and we would discover that the editor, who by and large was a British scholar writing in the 1990s, had said something about John Locke or some historical context thing that my students were totally uninterested in. And they were like, we flipped all the way back here, and this doesn't help us. So I wanted a different kind of edition that had new readers in the United States in the 21st century in mind. And I wanted there to be a very user-friendly, reader-friendly way of filling you in, first-time reader, about what you really need to know in order to understand and appreciate this novel on a first reading. I felt that there were plenty of editions out there that were designed to help people go more deeply into Jane Austen's novels. David Shepard, a historian, has created annotated editions, and those are so heavily annotated. There's one page of Austen, and there's one page of David Shepard telling you about everything. I mean, it's almost overwhelming. his editions, I think, and certainly not for the first-time reader. There are beautiful coffee table editions published by Harvard's Belknap Press, each created by scholars. And again, like the text of the novel is in one column, and then there's explanatory material, and then there are wonderful pictures. And it's all, I mean, they're fabulous editions, but they're not really readable, especially not for someone who's just trying to get a grasp and see what this is all about for the first time. And I had in mind from the beginning my dental hygienist. You know, there you are in the dentist's chair. Oh, what do you do for a living? Oh, I teach. What do you teach? I teach literature. Where do you teach? I teach at a Gouger. What do you teach? I teach Jane Austen. Oh, I've never read Jane Austen. And I wanted to, not the hygienist at the time, no. But I was thinking, like, if you, my trusted dental hygienist, were to read Jane Austen for the first time and you didn't have me whispering in your ear the helpful clarifications, I wanted there to be a book that would have those helpful clarifications in it. Like, you're not taking a class with me, but here's what I've learned you might need to know. So all of that went into Emma. And I'll talk through the particular elements in a moment in relation to Pride and Prejudice. And then 2 years later in 2017, for the 200th anniversary of Persuasion, same wonderful cover artist, Da Duchenne, did this lovely evocative cover front and back. If you know the story of Persuasion, it centers on Anne Elliot, who has for 8 years been heartbroken after an engagement came to an end, and the man to whom she was engaged is in the Navy. So in her silhouette, she's imagining him out at sea in his ship, and he's on the back. He looks a little bit like he's blindfolded, but that just means that he's imagining the land. So that is a lovely purple Persuasion that I'm using in the classroom right now with my current Goucher students. Yeah, house, ship. And then after that one, I worked on the book A New Jane Austen, and this fed into the Mansfield Park thinking in a couple of ways that I want to bring across. So I'm wearing a replica of one of these topaz crosses. The originals are set in gold. Mine is gold-plated. I am not selling them. No, Jane Austen's house will gladly sell them to you. Yeah. So Jane Austen had two brothers in the Navy, Frank and Charles. Charles, the younger brother, he earned prize money, which is what you got when you were fighting in the Napoleonic War, and your ship took, say, for example, a French ship, and then the profits of that were divided up among everyone in the crew, and you got a portion in accordance with your rank. And young Charles was so excited he had prize money, and he did something very generous. He bought 2 cross pendants for his 2 older sisters. They were the daughters, everybody, that is to say, the father of the family was a clergyman in the Church of England, so wearing a cross would have been certainly in keeping with the Anglican faith. We don't know, excuse me, we're gonna have questions at the end, thank you. We don't know whether one of these belonged to one sister and the other to the other sister. It was thought for a long time, based on evidence that's since been discredited, that the one you see on the left, the more rectangular one, belonged to Cassandra, and the one shaped like this belonged to Jane. But as we say, we're not sure anymore, so maybe they traded them back and forth. Now that you have this image in your mind, you can rewatch every TV and film adaptation of Jane Austen since the 1990s and notice how many costume designers have stuck one of these around the necks of one or another. They have become very common. In the 20th century, an American collector bought these 2 crosses when they were sold for the first time by the family descendant down to whom they had been passed. His name, I think you'll see it better on this screen, Charles Beecher Hogan. When he bought the crosses, he was a senior at Yale. And he paid a lot of money. He was not a rich man, young man. He had received a windfall bequest from an aunt. He aspired to be an Austen scholar. Collecting was part of that idea, and he blew his entire windfall on buying the topaz crosses. I mean, as you do, right? He kept reading journals beginning in his senior year at Choate and throughout his Yale years and beyond. And he loved Austen. He loved Austen so much that, as you can see, he wrote about Mansfield Park. It is a perfect work of art. I wish it would go on forever. Jane Austen is my favorite novelist simply because she writes such exquisitely perfect, et cetera, et cetera. And before I worked on this edition of Mansfield Park, I went around making fun of young Charles Beecher Hogan for saying that he wished Mansfield Park could go on forever. I said publicly on many occasions, no one has ever wished that. All readers wish that it were a little shorter, and I eat my words, because when I was rereading Mansfield Park really slowly and carefully to create this edition, I got so into it in a way I've never gotten into it. I think I'd never read it slowly enough before. And it was like a psychological thriller. I could not put it down. I did not want it to end. So I'm here to tell you it can happen. It happened to Charles Beecher Hogan. Now it's happened to me. In later life, when he had had some undergrad, he was a little bit more critical. He said of Mansfield Park that of all of her novels, this one contains the greatest feeling of moralizing. Yes, check. Moves more slowly than the others, indeed. But as to the characters and incidents, especially the Portsmouth scenes, when the character Fanny Price goes back to the city where she was born, not the exact same house, but her family of origin. He continues, it is wonderful as only she can make the characters and incident wonderful. Okay, so this edition, what's in it? Same components, pretty much, one exception, as are in the Emma and the Persuasion that I did. And after that summary paragraph, how would I want to describe this novel to someone reading it now for the first time? I asked to and was allowed to rewrite the paragraph about Jane Austen's literary career the Penguin had been using for some time. Again, if you only have this much space, what does it seem most important for people to know about Jane Austen? I wanted to make sure to avoid words like rector of the Church of England. You might know what a rector is if you're Episcopalian, but if you're not, you probably won't. So I found that just clergyman works better. And not to use words about literary genres that might not be accessible to people. And then beyond that, here are the contents of this new edition, which, as I said, mostly map onto the previous ones. I wrote an introduction. I had heard from students over the years, and I had felt myself that most of the introductions that you get in classroom editions of classics are not introductions at all. They often tell you things about the plot that you wish you weren't reading right away. They usually, if the critic has an axe to grind, the critic grinds it. So it's really a short critical essay in the guise of an introduction. And I thought, no, what people really want to know is introductory things. So that's what these introductions do. Then I have a short page explaining how this edition works, what's in it, what's different about it, tips for reading. Again, not starting from the presumption that Jane Austen is easy for everyone to read, and if she's not easy for you to read, there must be something wrong with you. No, I give lots of advice to my students, and I share it here too. Use an audiobook. Go slowly. You know, things that help. What's brand new for this edition that I didn't do before is a family tree. Because we always make one in class. We write one on the whiteboard. Who are all these people and how are they related to each other? So I just put one in here. And then the contextual essays, third from the bottom, this is where all the information goes that would be in separate endnotes or footnotes in a different edition. I'll say more about those as we move on. So what's in the introduction? Information, not interpretation, not analysis, not critical commentary, information. When did she write this? When was it published? How? How many copies? How did it sell? Information that people are curious about. Mansfield Park is an extraordinary novel of Austen's because it contains several episodes and elements that were inspired by her life. Jane Austen by no means based her characters on real people exclusively. She had an enormous imagination and she used it. That said, she did take that episode of being given a cross pendant by her brother and transform it in Mansfield Park into a brother's gift to his sister. And it goes on from there. And there are more examples in that section of elements of life that Austen transformed. In the course of writing this novel, Jane Austen was also giving advice about writing. Several of her nieces and nephews were aspiring writers. One of her nieces, Anna, was working on a novel, And there's a whole series of Jane Austen letters to Anna from the time of Mansfield Park's composition that are like getting a writing workshop from Jane Austen, from your aunt, the published novelist, full of advice. Do this with your plot. Don't send your characters to Ireland because you've never been to Ireland. You can't write confidently about Ireland. Write about what you know. That advice holds good today. I know it gets repeated. So it's a lovely kind of masterclass from Jane Austen in what to write about, and we see the choices that she made as a writer as well. Information about how the edition sold, what the response to it was. The word for that in literary studies is reception. And then it ends. So this is where I embarrass you guys in the back. Editors get to just, shoehorn in a little bit of thanks. So I thanked Elda, my editor. Dedicated the edition to my older child, Avery Juliette Wells, who is an undergraduate at Bard and who went through a lot this past couple of years. While this edition was in train, I was thinking about Fanny Price's fortitude, and I was thinking about Avery's fortitude. And then my 3 Goucher College students, Nalani, Athena, and Samia, who are going to look really embarrassed back there. We're doing an independent study last fall, and we looked at all the editions of Mansfield Park. I think every single one in Goucher's collections. We looked at illustrations. We thought together about what might go in this novel, and we talked about it. So thank you. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming. Tips for reading. I already talked about those a little bit about an edition. Here's the family tree. This went through so many back and forths with the production design team because the lines were in the wrong place, that kind of thing. Who's who, the birth order. It's actually really hard to figure out. It takes effort. Austen does not make it easy. Fanny Price, the main character, has a whole lot of siblings. What order are they in? She gives us enough information, but you really have to piece it together. And then the Crawfords at the bottom, they're 2 different marriages, so they're half siblings, but Austen never uses the term half or step, and so you can get pretty tangled if you're like, oh, it's his sister, but which one? So I was hopeful that would help. The contextual essays start with the category of social rank, money, and property, and go on from there. All the examples in these essays are from Mansfield Park. There are plenty of reference sources out there that will tell you about social rank in Austen's novels, and they will give you examples from all of the novels, which is not helpful if you're just reading one of them. So these are all pegged. And the innovation here, it's small, but I'm proud of it, is I tell you which chapters each essay focuses on, so you know when to read them. I wish I had done that for Persuasion and Emma. It would have made it easier to use in the classroom. The suggestions for further exploration are as wide-ranging as I could make them. So you've just read Mansfield Park. Would you like to watch a film? Would you like to take a trip? Would you like to go on the internet and have a virtual experience? Would you like to read fiction? And these are my recommendations. Would you like to watch Mansfield Park, a chamber opera? That's actually really good. I recommend the chamber opera. Peabody put it on several years ago. And then just to shout out Jane Austen Society of North America once again. Membership is affordable for all and free for students at present. The Jane Austen Summer Program is moving this year, so this is already out of date. It says it's in North Carolina, as it has been since its founding. It's moving to Pennsylvania this summer, and then a number of real and virtual sites that you can visit, including the Race and Regency Lab, which is an initiative, a collaborative initiative, the brainchild of Patricia A. Matthew. And Tricia was the editor for the Pride and Prejudice and the Northanger Abbey editions that came out last week, that along with this one make the complete 6 for Penguin Classics Deluxe. And then in all of my editions, I seized the opportunity to showcase some images from Goucher's extraordinary collection. And this, you can tell I pulled it from a proof sheet, so that's a little query to the author in the upper right there, just hanging out. The first illustrations to Mansfield Park came in the 1830s when the novel was reissued, and there were only 2 illustrations, one on the title page, one on the facing page. And the one on the left shows Fanny Price with her cross being offered a necklace, a chain by Mary Crawford, and they are helpfully the characters wearing 1830s dresses and hairstyles, because that illustrator was, not concerned with thinking back to 1814. And the other scene is from the long episode in which the characters are putting on an amateur play, theatricals. Well, the four of us, students and I, were looking at the volumes in Goucher's collection. We came upon something that I had never seen before, which is a paperback edition of Mansfield Park from 1845. A really cheap edition. It was sold for 25 cents. And the print is in 2 columns, really teeny print, really hard to read. It would have been an awful way to try to read Mansfield Park. The publishers were seeing whether there were readers in the United States who would pay 25 cents but not more for a Jane Austen novel. They thought, the publishers, they planned to publish all 6 titles in this format, but they didn't. They published this one, and they published Pride and Prejudice under the title Elizabeth Bennet or Pride and Prejudice, and then they stopped. But there are only a very few copies of this super cheap edition that survive anywhere in the world, so it's extraordinary that Goucher has one. And I was also thinking back several years to a Jane Austen Society of North America annual meeting from 2014, the 200th birthday of publication of the novel in Montreal. Dara Friedman Wheeler, who at the time was on the psychology faculty of Goucher, she and I wrote a 1-act play and acted in it and dragooned other people into acting in it. I got to play Sir Thomas Bertram. I can tell you, putting on that greatcoat turns you into a patriarch. Can't recommend it highly enough. I mean, the dresses are fun, but the greatcoats are amazing. Yes, the characters in Mansfield Park went to family therapy and tried to figure themselves out. And then last thing I'll show you, I have a grant from Goucher this year, which is generously funded by the son of a Goucher alumna. It's called the Year of Exploration Grant. And it too was inspired by Mansfield Park, but not only by Mansfield Park. I decided to investigate interplay of body and mind in Jane Austen, and not to think historically about it, not to ask, well, what did people during her lifetime say about bodies and minds, but to read in general audience books about science and neuroscience in the brain now. So I've been reading about walking. I have also been taking horseback riding lessons. Goucher has a very distinguished equestrian program, award-winning equestrian team, and also allows total novices like me to take lessons on college-owned horses. So I've completed my first semester. Those of you who know the film Clueless may remember the line in which the character Dion says, Cher is saving herself for Luke Perry. It's a comment on the character Cher's virginity. I mention this. You wonder why I'm mentioning this. The horse I've been assigned to ride is named Luke Perry because he's so good looking. So yes, this semester, Lukey and I are in the ring Monday morning. That's what they call him. Monday morning at 10:40. So think of us trotting on Monday morning. But that's, where does this all go next? A project like this generates as many ideas as it contains. And I want to keep thinking about Fanny Price and her extraordinary mind, her extraordinary body, and walking and horseback riding and dancing and other things growing out of this. So now we have time for questions. Yay! And I'm happy, if you don't wish to ask a question in front of the whole group, then I'm really happy to talk to you one-on-one afterwards. Please don't hesitate. So thank you, and ask questions. Yeah. You're saying that like it might be a bad thing. So why questions are very, very, very hard to answer for Jane Austen, truly, because she left so few writings that have survived that give us insight into the creative process. So when we have a question like, woo, Mansfield Park having proceeded so slowly, and I do agree with you, so slowly for so long, and then he's in love with her and we're done. Oh my gosh, yes, very fast. Austen does much the same maneuver in Northanger Abbey. And there she jokes about it. She has the narrator say to the reader, you can tell from the telltale compression of pages that we are all hastening together to perfect felicity. Which is like, you know it's almost over because you're here. You know that there isn't that much more that can possibly happen. It's what Austen's narrator does in Mansfield Park is say, and this has become a famous statement, let other pens dwell on guilt and misery. I quit such odious subjects as fast as I can. And so she's kind of giving us a justification. Like Fanny is her main character. Fanny is tormented. Fanny is enduring. And when Fanny finally gets to the end of the enduring, there isn't a story to tell anymore. And so Austen just kind of wraps it up. But it's a very different approach than I know people are trained to do today. So I find it very interesting in the classroom when I have students who are training to become creative writers and their eyes grow wide and they say, Jane Austen is telling us, not showing us, and we're not supposed to do that. And I say, yes, but in the 1810s, evidently readers could accept that. But Jane Austen was not a bestseller during her day either, so we get the sense that she wasn't doing exactly what would have made her the most popular. Yeah. It'd be interesting to look again on the document Opinions of Mansfield Park and see, I don't recall anyone on that document specifically complaining that the ending felt rushed. So that absence of a comment might suggest, nah, it's more about us. They were kind of used to it. But you're right, it is really striking. The Brontes have had a literary pilgrimage fandom since the 19th century. And that was lucky for them because the building in which they lived and wrote, need to put this down, the Bronte Parsonage Museum didn't pass into other hands. And so that became an author house museum relatively quickly in the 19th century. In the Bronte Society, the fan group was founded, but it never became as large as the Jane Austen Society. I have many theories. One is that the dresses from Jane Austen's time period are a lot more fun to wear than dresses from the Bronte's period. This sounds flippant, but I mean, cosplay, dress up, like Jane Austen Regency dresses, they're flattering to everybody, they're comfy, you can dress and you can dance in them. Yeah, it's different. Jane Austen's novels are funny. You can't accuse the Brontes of being funny. So sorry, they're not. The Brontes have had movies, and goodness knows we're about to have another Wuthering Heights. So maybe that will increase the fandom, but Jane Austen benefited a ton from having Pride and Prejudice adapted in 1940, the first ever Austen feature film. Around the world, it was celebrated. It launched many adaptations and translations. And then in the 1990s, wonderful film and screen adaptations that have stood the test of time, worth seeing. Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy is personally responsible for more fan fiction than I can count. And it just keeps growing. Yeah, but that's a hard why question too. Like why? And the story of Jane Austen with modest renown in her lifetime and now this international mega fandom. It's so unusual. There's not another author for whom that's the story to tell. Much more common is in their lifetime they're really famous and now no one reads them like Walter Scott. Well, this is an interesting episode. There is a Jane Austen letter to her elder sister Cassandra. The letter is from the time period when Austen was writing Mansfield Park. And in that letter to Cassandra, Jane says, just as you're recalling, and now for a complete change of subject, I will write of ordination. But the context is, in this letter I am writing to you, Cassandra, I am now going to speak of ordination. There were scholars for a while, and I've never understood how they could have made this mistake, frankly. They thought, oh, Jane Austen hasn't started Mansfield Park yet, and now she's going to start it and write about ordination in that new novel. But that doesn't make any sense given the dates that were recorded for Jane Austen's composition. So it really is just in that letter. But you're right, Mansfield Park has a main character who has chosen to be a clergyman. He doesn't have to be, he's chosen that path. He feels drawn to the vocation. He gets ordained in the course of the novel. It's not narrated. I mean, he goes away, he comes back ordained. And he is Edmund Bertram, who is also in my immortal words. Edmund's head is turned by the captivating Mary Crawford. I had to correct that. I originally had the beautiful, brilliant Mary Crawford, and then I reminded myself, no one calls her beautiful. They call her very pretty, and it's clear that she's charming, full of charisma, but I changed it to captivating rather than beautiful. So Edmund, who is the most morally upright character whom you could hope to find, Edmund spends an enormous part of this novel just helplessly gazing at Mary Crawford and helplessly hoping that Mary Crawford will magically turn into a good person. And poor Fanny is just watching this. I don't know what the commentary is on being a newly ordained clergyman in the Church of England and also being apparently so vulnerable to this extremely captivating woman. In addition to Jane Austen's father being a clergyman, several of her brothers either spent their whole careers as clergymen or changed careers in one case and became a clergyman. So she knew lots of clergymen, and in her novels she often made fun of them. Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice. As far as we know, her father, her brothers all understood that this wasn't a way of her being unkind to them, but just an awareness that many people then, and perhaps still now, people who become clergy people are not necessarily the most admirable people ever. They might have different reasons for doing it, especially in that century, in that place and time. There were women best-selling novelists in Jane Austen's era, and she read some of them growing up, and she had contemporaries who were selling a lot more copies than she was. And Rebecca Romney spoke here at the Pratt a couple of years ago while she was working on her book, Jane Austen's Bookshelf, and that book was published last February, and Rebecca Romney, who is a book collector and rare book dealer, writes about many of the women authors who were influential on Jane Austen, so it's a great overview. Jane Austen made the artistic choice to follow her own literary instincts, impulses. To write, at one point she said, "I must keep to my own style and write in my own way. I should never succeed in any other." She knew what kinds of novels were selling like hotcakes, and she chose not to try to write those kinds of novels, but instead to write these kinds of novels. And she was a very intelligent woman. She must have been aware that there was a trade-off for her in terms of her sales. And of course, many of us in the intervening 200 plus years have wished that somehow she could know that her courage and her being true to herself paid off with this massive legacy. Of course, she can't know that, I don't think, but it would be nice to imagine that she could. Yeah. Ooh. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Young niece. Nothing? Clueless? Not even Clueless? Clueless is the magic key for many young people. And that is people who come into my classroom. Clueless came out in 1995. It's 30 years old this year. But I am still meeting young people in their, in their late teens who grew up on Clueless, have no idea it's connected with Emma, who can recite you the entire screenplay. So yeah, try asking about Clueless. Yeah. Some of my Goucher undergrads report that they were supposed to read Pride and Prejudice in high school, or they sometimes say, "Oh, we read Pride and Prejudice in high school," and I said, "Did you read it? Read it?" And then they're like, "No, we didn't read it. It's uncommon. Public schools, very uncommon to have Austen, even in AP literature by now. Independent schools might have Austen. Yeah, independent private boarding schools, more likely. Homeschooled students are often reading Austen. And people who have people like you in their lives to watch a lovely movie with them and then hand them, maybe the graphic novel YA version or an update. There's so much young adult fiction now, and much of it's really worthwhile with an Austen basis. So if you have a reader who's maybe not ready to tackle the big thing, there are ways in. I should say before we say goodbye, don't read Mansfield Park first. Please don't read Mansfield Park first. It's what my father-in-law did. He was an academic provost. He knew I worked on Jane Austen. He's like, "Juliette, I was curious about Jane Austen, so I've been reading Mansfield Park." And I thought, no, he hasn't read another Austen novel. Because he started with Mansfield Park. Start with Pride and Prejudice. Older readers start with Persuasion. Younger readers, Northanger Abbey can be great to start with. Don't start with Mansfield Park. But later. Okay, on that note, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Please help me thank today's editor, Juliette Wells. Yep. And I love that she had a picture of her editor, because she'd love to hear Juliette say, "Please don't read this book, but you should purchase it."
No, I meant not first.
Not first.
Later.
Later.